SimCity holds a special place in my heart, and I'm willing to bet many of you out there feel the same. I spent countless hours meticulously crafting the perfect city, from plumbing systems to managing traffic, only to unleash utter chaos on its inhabitants. Ah, the memories. It's weird though, because on paper, meticulously zoning and managing electric needs seems kind of boring, but the sheer amount of control here is just incredible. But how did a franchise that pretty much single-handedly pioneer the city building genre seemingly just vanish over the last decade? So let's explore whatever happened to SimCity. Hi everyone, my name is Otto and welcome to Exits Examined. We'll be exploring the lives of people, companies, and more after their prime time has seemingly come to an end. If that sounds good to you, there's a subscribe and like button below. Now, it wouldn't be fair to say that SimCity started the city building genre, because the Sumerian game in 1964 was a text-based pioneer with some overarching similarities. You governed a city, juggled resources, and it basically captured the essence of running a city. Then in 1982, Utopia brought real-time gameplay and graphics to the mix, but these were still pretty primitive. The modern city builder we know and love actually emerged from a pretty unlikely place, a shooter game called Raid on Bungling Bay. Will Wright, one of the developers working on the game, loved making the city in the background of the map. He actually loved it more than playing the game itself and started to wonder, well, what if players would feel the same? Now, Will Wright is a fascinating character, and the sheer amount of knowledge and passion he has about video games is truly impressive. If you're interested, I'll link a video of some of his talks in the description below because he was way ahead of his time. It wasn't just video game knowledge though, because he also incorporated urban planning theories into this project, which would go on to become SimCity. However, because the game did not have a win condition, many people didn't really consider it marketable, and Wright had a hard time finding a publisher. So the solution was simple. He would just do it himself. And this would of course go on to be the start of Maxis. So before we get too far, what even is SimCity? For those of you who don't know, well, it's easy. You craft your own city from scratch. You are part mayor, part urban planner, and even a bit of a god. But it's not all fun. You have to ensure the city's vital functions are met and balance the needs of things like electricity, traffic, zoning, and even disasters like fires and the occasional alien. As the game goes on, you can make good or bad choices and watch your city thrive or decay. The only limit was your creativity, and to have this much control was just incredible. It's important to mention that this sandbox style of gaming was pretty novel at the time, and it became a hit. 4 years after the original, Maxis capitalized on the success with SimCity 2000. Using an excellent-looking isometric perspective, it introduced features like water pipe networks, subway systems, and a wide range of buildings. Personally, SimCity 2000 was my gateway drug to the series. I loved the in-game newspaper because it kind of acted as a window into the city on a human level. It amplified the concerns of my citizens to 11 about all their traffic woes, which I just love to ignore. The impact of SimCity 2000 was pretty monumental, and it would become one of the highest selling games of the era. So Maxis was sitting pretty high after 2000 and started pumping out game after game after game. These included a truly staggering number of simulators, from the relatively safe Sim Health, Sim Park, Sim Town, Sim Farm, and Sim Tower, to the more unhinged side of things, including Sim Refinery, Sim Ant, Sim Tunes, and Marble Drop. I don't want to come across as mean here. Sim Ant and Sim Tunes were by all accounts not bad games, but by focusing on quantity rather than quality, they lost sight of their core product. Not to mention that some of these simulators were expensive and suffered from poor releases. To give some context, Maxis went from 10 releases in both 1995 and 1996 to dropping down to just one in 1998. So things were looking pretty grim for the studio, and that's how EA swooped in to quote-unquote save the studio. Maxis apparently agreed to the acquisition in order to take advantage of EA's strong distribution, but it must have been a pretty difficult decision to make because it triggered a wave of changes at the company, and almost half their staff were laid off. Now, before the acquisition, Maxis had already started development on a new SimCity title, and this would come out in 1999 as SimCity 3000. It introduced social and economic complexity, and players had to grapple with real-world issues like slums, income inequality, and a middle class. It greatly improved the UI, and the visuals looked great, even by today's standards. It also allowed for real-world landmark buildings like the Eiffel Tower or White House. But it has to be said, it was complicated and had a high bar for entry. But if you could get past that, it was an excellent game with some incredible music. It sold extremely well, but it seems not really to be brought up in conversation as much as the other titles. And maybe this is because it was somewhat overshadowed by The Sims, which was released in the same time period. Speaking of, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but it's worth a mention that in 2000, there were two releases from Maxis. One was more of a novelty in the SimCity 64, which was a Japanese exclusive game, but also, of course, The Sims. Conceived by Will Wright after a fire destroyed his home and he had to rebuild it from scratch, it would go on to be a massive success. But that's not to say that EA gave up on the older franchise. And it's good they didn't, because the next SimCity title, SimCity 4, would be seen by many as the best in the series. Released in 2003, you could create regions comprised of interconnected cities and use a traffic model that was apparently more advanced than what most traffic engineers had in real life at the time. It was more accessible than past entries and just was a gorgeous looking game. As a bonus, you could even import your Sims into it, and even better was the endless amounts of mods that have been made for it. People still play it today, and with the addition of its expansion Rush Hour, you could basically build any city you could dream up. Just a great game all around. In an effort to expand the series, or more pessimistically, just cash in, there was a number of spin-offs in the following years. SimCity DS inherited 3000's graphics and used the dual screens for its interfaces. It seemed like a good idea on paper, but it had some pretty bad minigames and annoying advisors which you couldn't even turn off. Fortunately, this was iterated on in SimCity DS2 and later SimCity Creator, which had better visuals and just ran much smoother. SimCity Societies took the series in a different direction and focused less on city management and more on the social aspect of your city. Instead of managing power and water, you managed social values like creativity and spirituality, with every building affecting these differently. It was ambitious, but never really took off. I think this is because, although it used the SimCity name, it wasn't really a SimCity game, and it wasn't even made by Maxis. This, on top of some technical shortcomings, just made it not that desirable for most fans. But that was not the only black sheep, because a Facebook version of SimCity called SimCity Social exists, or rather existed. It used a freemium model and allowed users to create their own simplistic city and interact with cities of their Facebook friends. It did not last long though, and it was shut down just after a year because despite initially starting strong, there was a huge decline in user activity. However, this was not the death of the freemium model in SimCity because of SimCity Build It, a mobile version that was a top-grossing app for a long time. The gameplay is much the same as the mainline series, except you manually place buildings one by one, and of course there are some annoying microtransaction practices in here, but it does look great with assets that were taken from the mainline series, which we should probably get back to, and of course brings us to the famous SimCity reboot. So, in 2013, it seemed like Maxis had big plans for this reboot. It was developed with a brand new engine, reimagined the core gameplay, and was set to feature an online mode. It promised a lot, and then the launch came and it was pretty much a complete disaster. So let's break this down. EA was pushing a mandatory, always online aspect of the game, which meant you couldn't play without the internet and rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Another huge issue was the size of the cities, which was severely limited. I mean, we're only talking enough space for like a borough here. And this is of course just compounded with the infamous server issues, disconnections, and loading times on launch. EA vastly miscalculated the demand of the game, and it was just not playable on launch, period. From the start, there was this tug of war between Maxis and EA. Maxis wanted stunning graphics and deeper simulation mechanics. In contrast, EA wanted the emphasis to be on the fad of the time, multiplayer, and that sweet, sweet long-term revenue. It's too bad because at the core, there is a good game here with beautiful graphics and a great soundtrack. However, the damage from launch was just irreversible, and the lack of mod support didn't do anything to help. It was such a mess that EA offered players a free game to compensate, and it would go on to receive only one DLC, Cities of Tomorrow, before Maxis Emeryville was closed. I mean, to call this a complete disaster is just an understatement. On one hand, EA didn't listen to what fans wanted: mod support, large cities, and offline pay, and they got exactly what they deserved. But on the other hand, it's too bad because this mistake wouldn't end up sinking EA, but rather the SimCity franchise. In the wake of the launch, Maxis went through a long series of layoffs, and since then, there hasn't even been another entry into the series. But that's not to say nothing good came from the reboot. Fortunately, another dev team, Colossal Order, was watching the disaster unfold and stepped in to fill the void. Cities Skyline is a love letter to the classic SimCity, built with modders and fans in mind. It took a more realistic graphical approach and tried to foster a community with modders and creators. It's interesting because a lot of positive reviews about Skylines was just directed at how the SimCity reboot failed. Skylines not only filled the void left by SimCity, but pretty much became the city builder. But I would be doing a massive disservice if I only mentioned Skylines, because SimCity is the granddaddy of the genre and has inspired a huge number of other games, and a lot of these are classics in their own right. Anno 2070, Tropico, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Prison Architect, the Caesar series. I mean, traces of SimCity can be found everywhere if you're looking for it, and it's impossible to say just how influential this series actually was. That's not even to mention how impactful it's been on a personal and human level, with it by all accounts inspiring a generation of city planners and providing a place for the regular person to just think about urban development. So is that where the story ends? Well, maybe, but it should be noted that in the past few years, EA has, in a surprising move, rebuilt the Maxis studios and are currently hiring for a number of roles, so you never know. Although these roles seem mostly focused on The Sims, this could be the foundation for a return of the series. But things are interesting because of the recent release of Cities Skylines 2. Now, to stay on track, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but reviews for this game have not been positive, and fans have been left disappointed again. This is complete speculation, but it would be extremely ironic if a new SimCity game was greenlit and succeeded off the disappointment from the new Skylines game, just as Skylines did to Maxis in 2015. But you know, even if there's never another game in the series, I think that's okay. SimCity has left a huge mark on the industry. It pretty much invented the city building genre, inspiring players and developers to spend countless hours making, destroying, and just playing around with millions of cities. And I think as far as legacies go, that's a pretty good one to have. But what do you think? Have you played SimCities? Would you like to see another entry into the series? Anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to help me continue keeping this channel alive and make more videos like this, please check out my Patreon in the link below or subscribe. And as always, if you ever have any ideas about what you'd like me to cover next, just drop a comment below. I'm always really interested to hear what you have to say. And that's it. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.